Well, hello everyone. My name is Garrett, and this is the second in our series of professional lighting techniques hosted by Light Panels. If you've missed the first session that we did, you can find that on the Light Panels website as well as on their YouTube channel, and that's where this will also go after we're done. In this series so far, we have talked about how to set up interview lighting, as well as how to, in this episode, talk about how to light night sequences. Further on, moving forward, in the next one, we're going to be talking about how to light car interiors or do something called a poor man's process, in addition to a whole host of other types of lighting situations that filmmakers often find themselves in. So if you are interested in any of that and you want to see what we've done before, doing now, and of course, where this is going in the future, make sure that you register for future events and then keep a look on the Light Panels webpage and their YouTube channel for these videos. Now, for this, we're going to be talking about something that oftentimes filmmakers find themselves doing, and more often than not, at least when you're starting out, you don't quite get it right. And this is, of course, talking about lighting for night. Especially right now in 2020, cameras are pretty incredible, and sensors on those cameras are also pretty incredible. And so we get these cameras that have these super high ISO ranges, and a lot of people begin to think that they don't need lights to film in dark spaces because they have cameras that have extremely sensitive sensors. And while it's great to have cameras with sensitive sensors that allow you to film in difficult or complicated places and areas, that doesn't account for the way that light behaves. Lighting, like everything else within filmmaking, is a layer within our storytelling. And the more intentional we are with our lighting, the better we are then able to convey and tell these stories. And it's much more about understanding how light behaves and then using the correct fixtures, modifiers, and applications for those lights to then tell those stories. So again, today we're talking about breaking down night and how to film for night, and specifically, of course, how we would then use Light Panels fixtures, primarily Gemini lights, in how to do that. But before we can talk about how to light for night, we should, of course, look at a scene that we filmed at night. So with that, let's take a quick look at this next scene here. Hello?
No, in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
They'll probably get funky. I'm not that. Parking is paid fire hydrant. One parking, no parking zone. In the wrong direction.
There's a lot going on in this scene, and I'm going to be trying my best to break this down in as detailed of a way as I can. But if at any time you have any questions during this chat here, we have a Q&A module here in the Zoom, as well as kind of the general chat function. So if you do have questions, throw them up in the Q&A or the chat. I will be able to see them here, and I'll address them as we move through this. Now, before we talk about the fixtures in particular that we used and how we used those to get the lighting that we want, there are two kind of basic concepts that we should address first when lighting for night, but also in general. The first is that we want to light bright. It is much easier to light a scene in a bright way and then expose properly to then grade dark than it would be to film in a dark place or not to have enough light and be fighting that exposure, or be, of course, relying on the ISO that we were talking about earlier, which then, of course, makes color grading much more difficult, right? We want to make sure that we are lighting bright and grading dark So if you look at any of the behind the scenes on your favorite movies and shows and things, especially the ones that are filmed at night, you'll see that they have massive fixtures, and it doesn't look anything like night in terms of the brightness of a scene when they're filming it. But the final result looks like night. And there's a very specific procedure by which we go and do that. But the first thing, which is always the most important when you're filming dark scenes, is to make sure that you are lighting bright. And that's what's great about these Geminis, and we're going to get a little bit more into the specifics of these fixtures here in a minute, but lighting bright, always the first step. The second thing is that we want to light spaces and not faces. Oftentimes, people will buy lights that aren't bright enough, and so then we need to bring the lights in closer, which then limits how our talent can move and how the camera can move within our given scene. So by having really bright lights also allows us to back those lights up and to illuminate or to light the entire area in which we're going to be filming, allowing our camera and our subjects within our scenes to move freely within that space without having to break down setups between every place we want to be. So for this scene, we had kind of two areas that we were playing within one large space. There was the phone area, right, where we had our talent picking up the phone. And then, of course, there was the loading dock where they were standing and kind of looking ominously around the area. Both of those were probably within 20 feet of each other, but if we hadn't lit the entire space, we'd have to then set up lights for each of those, and they might not look like they belong together, and lights may move, and the behavior of those lights would change. So by brighting very bright and by backing those lights up allows us to illuminate the entire space in the way that we want, and then, of course, to have lights that are bright enough to get the camera and the people to move throughout the scenes the way that we want. So those are kind of the main concepts that I want to talk about before we get into the fixtures. Are those two. Once we understand those two, then we can actually talk about how we go about lighting this. So the first is this idea of filming at night is we need to replicate or emulate moonlight. And there are a couple of ways that you can do this, but understanding the behavior of moonlight is really important. Moonlight, while we kind of in the film world understand it to be kind of a bluish color, is actually a neutral white light because it's just reflecting the light off of the sun and onto the earth. And in the same way, it's a fairly small light source in comparison to people on Earth because, of course, it's so far away. So the light is actually kind of a hard light, much more than it would be kind of a soft diffused light. That said, that's the reality of how moonlight works, not necessarily how we would want it to feel aesthetically within our scene. And so for us, we actually used a 2x1 Gemini light, which you can kind of see right here. We used a 2x1 Gemini light, which is a 2x1 soft, and we put it inside of a snap bag, which is a soft box. We put, I think it was like a quarter stop or a half stop of magic cloth over the front of that, which again just made the surface area of that light even bigger. And a 2x1, of course, on its own is a massive fixture. We powered it off of batteries. In this case, we did it off of a VCLX. You can also power it off of V-mount or gold mount. And then we tuned it down to this really rich blue. Now, this is where it's a little bit different depending on the style that you're going for. Filmmakers have gels, which you can also dial in on the Gemini, which would be a metallic silver or a blue silver gel. Those are things that we would often use. We wanted something that was a little bit more blue, and you can see here just how blue it registers. It is a hard light because we backed that light off so far, but in general, it's much more blue than you would traditionally use. And of course, that's because we wanted to have this really high contrasty kind of look. The 2x1 soft, as well as the rest of the Geminis, all have hundreds of industry standard gels built into them. So if you wanted to use a more standard moonlight, like a metallic silver or a blue silver, you could dial those gels in very easily in the gel library. For this application of what we did, we used a feature within them called HSI, or hue, saturation, intensity. And for that, we dialed in that really, really rich blue because we wanted it to feel much cooler and grittier than moonlight naturally would. The nice thing about this, of course, is because we're in this industrial park, we don't have any mains power, right? And I also didn't bring any generators. And one of the great things about all of the Gemini lights is that they are very small, very compact, and lightweight, and also can be powered at 100% intensity off of batteries. So you saw in that little preview there that we used a VCLX, which is a massive cinema battery. Oftentimes it'll get used in camera packages and that kind of thing, but it can also take standard gold mount or A mount batteries in addition to V mount batteries. So however you want to power these lights, you absolutely can power them that way, which is great. So put it on a basic combo stand. We had it probably about 25 to 30 feet away from our actors, and that illuminated both of those spaces, the telephone space as well as the loading dock space, just with this really nice hard blue light. That was the first light, is this moonlight. The next type of light we're going to be talking about are motivated lights. In filmmaking, a motivated light is where there is an existing light within the space that you may or may not have control over, but you then need to alter the behavior of that light. So the light is there, you can't do anything with it, but it's not pushing light where you want or how you want. That is what motivated light is. So for that, we then used a 1x1 Gemini light. This is the 1x1 soft. And in this one, we put, again, a snap bag on it, and we put a snap grid. So we were able to focus that light down. So off camera, there was a sodium vapor light, which is a very, very orange light. And it was pushing orange light into our scene, but not where I wanted it. So I was then able to take this 1x1, again on battery power with a V-mount battery, put it on your basic stand, and push it up about 10 to 12 feet, pointed down into the area that I wanted. Now you can see that sodium vapor light in the background there in that shot. That's the light that I couldn't control, but then you see the light in front of it, and that's the light that I was then able to motivate or use to motivate that sodium vapor look. And you can see how it's casting on the wall behind our subject here, illuminating that wall. So that way they're not just standing in front of a bunch of nothingness. And it complements and contrasts that white light very, very well. So you can motivate any number of lights. You can motivate lights that you can see within your scene, right? That sodium vapor light you really couldn't see in the scene itself, but it was still there and it was still pushing light into our space. So by being able to direct that light where and how I want it to, makes it so that light then becomes a benefit and not necessarily a nuisance. So the 1x1 soft in the snap bag using the grid again allows us to just direct that light and control the spill. But going back to that second topic we were talking about of this idea of lighting spaces and not faces, downtime is the enemy of any effective production. The more downtime you have, the less time you're spending filming. There's a balance, right? We want to be as effective and efficient as possible. And the nice thing is because these lights are as bright as they are, moving from one area at the telephone to the other area at the loading dock, I actually didn't need to move that light at all. I simply rotated it on the stand about 30 degrees to point it from the wall down into the loading dock. But the behavior of the light, the look of the light, and the color of the light all remained the exact same. So again, eliminating downtime by lighting spaces and not faces helps us keep efficient on set. Okay, for the 2x1 soft, we used a soft box but pushed it back so that it was a hard source. What was the thinking for adding a soft box? This is a great question. So in lighting, the principle of how light behaves, whether hard light to soft light, the larger the surface area of the light source is compared to your subject, the softer that light will be. We're not talking about brightness, we're just talking about behavior, right? Hardness to softness. So the larger the surface area when compared to a source, the source of the light compared to your subject, the softer that light will be. The 2x1 is a massive fixture. The source, the surface area of that source is huge. But I backed that light up so far that I actually wanted to increase the surface area of that light even more, just to get it to cast the light in the way that I want, knowing that that light would be seen as a hard light simply because of the distance we were away. If I didn't have the softbox on there and we kind of kept the surface area of the light the same, it looked a little sourcey. It looked a little directional. You could tell that it was artificially lit. But by increasing that surface area just as much as we did was just enough to still keep it behaving as a hard light while pulling off some of the sourciness from that. And you can kind of adjust that as well with the type of diffusion that you put over the front. So that was the snap bag that we had on it. And I believe that we had a half stop of magic cloth diffusion on that. If we knocked that down to a quarter, you could then of course have it be more of a hard light. If we put it up to a full stop, you could then soften that up even more. So depending on the type of diffusion you put in front of it, you can also then modify that light's behavior that way. Going back to the 1x1 soft that we had as this sodium vapor light, going back to these gels, the gel library in these lights is incredible. So there again are standardized sources or gels that you can use to emulate sources. So we were able to then dial in exactly what a sodium vapor light would look like. And we were able to then color match that perfectly to the real sodium vapor light that was in the space. So again, I cannot overstate how great the gel library is when trying to source match to certain types of lights. We talked about the fact that that one's battery powered as well. That one was a 150 watt V-mount battery just on a single bracket, which is an absolutely incredible light. So Moonlight was our first, and then our second was our motivated sodium vapor light. The third light is also a motivated light, but it is what we would call a motivated implied light. And this is, we used the new Gemini 1x1 hard. Motivated lights, again, are using lights that are in your space, but altering them to behave how you want. An implied light is taking a light that doesn't exist at all off camera and making the audience feel like it is. So for this one, again, battery powered, you can see it there off of a single bracket. I put a 4-way barn door on it, but as you can see here, the 1x1 hard is an insanely bright light. In fact, the 1x1 hard is 5 times brighter than the 1x1 soft. And because of that, I was able to take this light, put it on the opposite side of the loading dock from where the phone booth was, and you can see it here. And I was able to put that up 10 to 12 feet in the air, and you can see just how bright that light is. The reason why we created this implied light, or this implied motivated light, is on the right side of the loading dock where we had this telephone, there was this white overhead light. Nothing on the other side. But that other side then fell into darkness or to nothingness. So by creating a new light over there, when you have your subject interacting in an industrial area, you see that there's this white light, harsh light coming down kind of in that phone, by having another white light or an additional white light somewhere else, the audience isn't going to question it. They're not going to say, well, where's that light coming from? They're going to register that as the same light that they have been seeing in camera. So again, motivated light, but this is an implied light because we're creating a light that wasn't there to begin with. But this is being used as a source light. So the 1x1 hard, insanely bright light. And the thing is that it's about the same weight and the exact same size as the 1x1 soft. So putting it on a basic stand and putting it up 12 feet in the air with a 4-way barn door, it's still lightweight enough that I'm not worried about having to use extra rigging or extra grip in order to get that light where I want it or how I want it to behave, which is incredible because up until this fixture, and this right here is the 1x1 hard that I've got right there, you would need a much bigger light or a much heavier light fixture to pull off that same look. So that was a really, really awesome addition. The next light, right? So we have Moonlight, we have the motivated sodium vapor, and then we have the implied motivated white light, which, by the way, we were able to take a color read off of the white light in the industrial area and then exactly color match the CT value of that light with the other white light. Another fantastic feature here in the Geminis. So we were able to color match those so they behaved perfectly together. The last light is actually one that I don't know if anybody even noticed, and we actually did what would be called creating practicals. And for that, we used a small little light called the Lycos Plus light. It's a small battery-powered handheld light that is basically the equivalent of about a quarter of an Astra light. It uses the same lenses and the same diodes, the same LEDs. But for this, what we did is we actually took these lights and we tuned them into the color that we wanted, and we placed them inside this flap here on these garage doors. So in the same way that we used the white implied motivated light to illuminate kind of the camera left side of our scene, we then used these Lycos Plus lights to give us some depth and dimension in this uplighting here for our garage door. And again, for the same reason, it's to create depth. We want to be able to see what's happening in the background, because that's then going to be what gives us our separation between our foreground and our background, right? We don't want it to fall into nothingness. Now, if you've ever used an Astra, you'll know that they are insanely crazy bright lights, and these are no different. In fact, I think I've got one right here. So these use, again, the same lensing. You can probably see it a little better like that. The same lenses that you would have with the Astra 6X. This is a bicolor panel, so you are able to then tune and adjust the CT value however you want. This works with the same modules or dongles that you would have for the rest of the Gemini setup. So if you wanted to run this off of Bluetooth, you absolutely could. And then you can, of course, adjust the intensity as well. For what you saw there, and we're going to take a look at it again here in a second, but for what you saw there, I had tuned these down to about 2 to 3% intensity to get that look on the garage door that you guys saw. Anything more than that, and it was way too bright for the scene that we were in. Because again, I didn't want to draw too much attention. I just really wanted to add depth. So 2 to 3% was as much as we needed out of those. But they are crazy bright lights. Somebody said, what's the approximate light output of the Gemini fixtures, and how do they compare to the 6X Astra? That is a great question. So the light panels team is probably going to be able to give you the exact lux value or foot candle value of those in comparison to another. So I don't have those figures for you right away, but I will tell you, I've never been in a lighting scenario where these lights weren't able to perform. I do know that this one is 5 times brighter than the 1x1 soft. Compared to the Astra, I know this one's more powerful for sure than the Astra, and I believe that it's comparable with the Geminis, but I'll again let the light panels team give you on that one. Somebody said, curious about the color temperature setting in the camera. Oh yes, perfect. I did not mention that, so don't worry. So the color, we filmed this with the red Komodo, and we did film it in RAW, so we were able to play with the color after the fact, but we did have the color in the camera set to 5600. So we did use the neutral white that we had from that light above the phone, as well as the implied motivated light that we put on the other side. That's what we tuned it to. That allowed the orange from the sodium vapor to be more orange, and of course the blue from the moonlight to be blue, but not too blue. If we adjusted our color temperature, of course, to be warmer, that blue that we had put in our moonlight would have been far too much for the camera to handle, because of course blue is the color channel that peaks the fastest. So by having it tuned to daylight allowed us to still get that color contrast that we wanted without blowing out any one of our particular color channels. So quick recap here of the actual fixtures that we used. We used the 2x1 soft as our moonlight. We used the 1x1 soft as our motivated sodium vapor light. We used the 1x1 hard as our implied motivated white light. And then we used the Lycos Plus lights as our background lights. So now that you know how we went about shooting this, I wanted to show you guys real quick the scene again, so that way you guys would be able to then notice how all of these lights worked one with another. Once we do that, we're then going to kind of break down individual light play for certain shots and things. So let's take a look at this scene again. That way you're able to see exactly how we pulled it off, and then we'll break down how it works.
Yeah. They'll probably get 20 years. Parking next to a fire hydrant. No parking down in the wrong direction.
asked a great question. You said, so when you say light, bright, gray, dark, do I have any of the ungraded shots so you can see how bright it was before it was edited? I didn't load any of the ungraded clips in here, so I apologize for that. I will on the next one, because this is going to be a theme as we're talking through these. In the next one, of course, we're talking about how to light a car interior at night. So I will bring some of the ungraded stuff so you can see just how bright we lit that scene, but I don't have those for you here. With that said, let's talk about kind of how we have these things set up, and then of course what that then does for us here. So if I come over here, this is kind of a basic overview of this setup here. So you can see right here, this is the 1x1 hard. That's the one in the 4-way barn door. And it's giving us a little bit of illumination down this wall, but again, we eliminated most of that with the barn door. What it's really doing is it's illuminating the shelf here, which is a little low in this angle to see, and then a little bit here on the ground here. And that's what's acting as our kind of reverse key on our subject when they're down here in the loading dock area. Here are the 3 Lycos Plus lights. Again, these are the created practicals that we used. There was no uplighting on this garage door, but it really felt weird not to have any sort of separation there, which is why we added those. Right here, this is the 1x1 soft that has the grid and the snap bag on it. That, of course, has been rotated into position for this loading dock area where our subject is. This, by the way, is that white light over the phone area that this light is then emulating. So it's the exact same color. It's the exact same output type. We just, because our implied light here is never seen on camera, I'm able to then shift and adjust the positioning that I want to get it to behave how I need it to. And the final one is this light right here. This is, of course, the first one that we talked about, which is that 2x1 Gemini, which is backed up off of our talent, put up on the combo stand and illuminating the area. And you can see just how nicely it illuminates the space that I'm filming in. It's a pretty nice, soft, even illumination across this entire wall section here. Again, having a direction, and you can see a little bit here, like we've got some shadows on the wall right there from behind the sodium vapor light. We're getting some shadow casting down here, which is kind of, again, the behavior of moonlight is directional. So that's all good and fine, but it doesn't have so much fall off that it then looks too terribly sourcey. So that, again, is where we've kind of set up all 3 of the lights. And then I kind of want to break down a couple of the shots and sequences kind of within this here. Another question here from Eric. We show ungraded footage as well. Does it allow us to get an idea of what you were going for? Yeah, so what I'll do is in the next one, and again, please make sure that you sign up for the next one. You can register for it now on the Light Panels webpage here, but I will show ungraded footage. I'll probably do some wipes so that we can kind of see the before and after of how it's going. But we went really crazy with the next one. We did use 2 2x1s in a dual array to effectively make like a giant 2-foot by 2-foot light wall for one of our lights. So we were working with a lot of light there. So yes, I will break that stuff down in the next one. Thank you for that. By the way, if you do have any thoughts, comments, or questions to move forward, link up with me on Instagram. It's just my name, so Instagram at Garrett Sammons. And just shoot me a DM. Let me know what you want to see. So, I'll be putting stuff up on there as well as stuff that relates to this, so we can break it down, all of that stuff together. Light Panels team also put the output for all of these in the chat. So if you guys, when we were talking about the output of the light fixtures, that's how those work there. And then, of course, they were kind enough to put a link to my Instagram there. Okay, so let's break this shot down here for a second here. I don't know if it comes across being super terribly dark on your screen versus mine, but we're going to go through it together. So again, we have 3 lights at play here that we can see. So on this side, on camera left, that's where we have our white light. This is what's illuminating this section of the hair, which again prevents our subject from falling into nothingness. And then kind of as a double bounce, that light is bouncing off the concrete floor, and then that's what's illuminating this kind of ceiling above him. So even though it still reads as night, and we it behaves as a night scene by having this illuminated as bright as it is behind our subject, again, creates really nice separation between my foreground and my background. Oftentimes, when filming night sequences, we're not thinking about our backgrounds nearly enough. And when our subjects just fall into the nothingness of the background behind our subject, and there's no separation between them, we lose a lot of the intent that we can go for when lighting for night. We want everything to be intentional. Because again, like this and everything else in lighting narrative work, it's not about recreating reality. That is not the purpose of how we light. The purpose of how we light is to create a new reality, right? So even though in a night scene, we're not always going to have backlighting on us that's going to give us separation from our foreground to our background, right? That's not real life. In the world of filmmaking and the worlds that we create and build, it's going to make our scenes stand out and our characters stand out and our storytelling stand out. So thinking about things in terms of how we want people to feel is far more important than how reality would actually exist within that space. Somebody asked here, hi, what camera did you use for this scene? I showed up a little late. So for this, we were filming with the red Komodo, and we had paired that with a set of the Leica R lenses, vintage photo lenses that were cinemated to work with cinema cameras. So combination of those two, we did film in RAW, and then of course graded this down to look the way that it looks now. John asks if the recording will be posted somewhere. Yes, this recording, as with last month's and the rest of this entire series, is going to be put up on the Light Panels website as well as on the Light Panels YouTube channel. So if you came in late, you want to see stuff that you missed, you can pop over there. You'll be able to get access to all that stuff, both past, present, and future. Simon put a link to where you can find all of that stuff through. Matthew says, can you walk us through the difference between the hard light and the soft light Geminis? Yes, so there's two main differences. The first, of course, is the output. The output of the hard is going to be much more intense than the soft, but the other is the behavior of the light. Again, going into how we put lights together, it's a combination of the surface area, but also in terms of how, especially with LED lights, we lens things, right? So these lights are panels. And if I take this guy off here, maybe I can dim this down. Maybe we'll see this a little better here. There we go. So these are a series of individual LED diodes that all work together to create a single source light. So the difference between the 1x1 hards and the 1x1 soft comes down to your beam angle, which is going to be, of course, the spread of that light. That's going to be a difference between those two because, of course, the more narrow our beam angle, the smaller that surface area of those lights are going to be, making that light more intense. So the behavior of that light is going to be more narrow, which is what's going to give you that hard light versus that soft light, right? So that's one thing too. Also, there are different fronts that you can get for these, which will also change the behavior of those lights. This is an ultra light currently, but you can get them in different configurations to get your lights to behave differently. But like anything else, your light and the way that light behaves is going to be how we look at the shadows. And we're going to look at that here in a second. So hard light is what is going to give us intense or defined shadows, right? Soft light is going to be where we can smooth a lot of those shadows out. And the 1x1 hards and softs, the difference between those two, especially with the way that they're engineered, does directly affect how those shadows play across your subjects' faces. So let's take a look here real quick. By the way, I hope that answered your question. If not, throw up another one here. Let's get back to this real fast here. So we have this white light. We talked about this. We talked about the background and how we separated our foreground from our background. Now, obviously, the main quote unquote light source is this blue light, which we have kind of coming across the face here and then down into the neck and a little bit into the hair right there. Now, again, going back to the behavior of moonlight in general is going to be a hard source. But again, we're not necessarily creating or recreating reality here. But for this, obviously, we're doing something that feels intense, like there's something important that's happening here, right? It's not a dialogue scene in a love, story. This is a much more kind of intense vibe, which is what we did with the lighting. So all of this blue light is coming off of that 2x1 Gemini soft, again with that snap bag over the top of it to increase its surface area. And that's again about probably 20 to 30 feet off of our subject where he's currently standing. The last light is going to be that sodium vapor light that we rotated, that 1x1 soft that we rotated over. And primarily, you're going to see that if I pinch and zoom in here, you're going to see that coming across the hair here, the tip of the nose here, and then of course the hair down there. That's really the only place that you're going to see it. But again, if you look at the light to the right of our subject's face in comparison to the light on the left of our subject's face, you'll see how different they are in terms of tone and color. So we have 3 different color values here that are playing 3 different ways across our subject's face. And it's going to give us 3 completely different looks. So if we go to this close-up here, and we go to this other side, right, we still have this moonlight that's coming through on this side of our subject's face. We have the white light that's coming across this side, and then we're getting just a little hint right there of that orange light on our subject's face. We're getting a small amount of catch light in the eye there from the 1x1, but all of this different color and all of this different light behavior all contribute to the way that we understand this night look to feel, right? If we all had it as one color, right, or we had it all as one light type, we wouldn't get the dynamics in the way that the light would play across the face, right? We need these different intensities and these different light behaviors and these different colors all to contribute to how we want our audience to feel about those things that we're lighting. Mike says, many thanks for light panels hosting these seminars. Yeah, light panels is super awesome for doing this, and we're about to get really nuts with it. So some of the stuff we're going to do is really, really, really cool. I mean, it's all really cool, but some of the stuff we're doing is wild. I've had a ball doing it, so do make sure you register for future stuff. Okay, so what are some of the pros and cons of shooting with a square Gemini versus a circular Sola light on set? So those are in 2 completely different fixture types, right? So with the Gemini being a panel light and the Sola being kind of a Fresnel style light, the behavior and the output of those lights are going to be wildly different. Gemini lights and panel lights work best with on-light modifiers, right? So things like the snap grids, the snap bags, which are like the softbox things. They have lanterns, they've got octaboxes. There's like all sorts of on-light modifiers that work really well with this. For Fresnel style lights, on-light modifiers outside of a 4-way barn door really isn't a thing. So then you're relying on off-light modifiers, which requires a lot more grip rigging to pull off. Nothing wrong with it, but that's really where you're going to start leaning more into G&E to do things. The best part about these is you get a lot of that intensity, but by having on-light modifiers on lightweight fixtures like this, it really eliminates the need for a lot of the G&E rigging. So for solo shooters, small indie stuff in particular, these are sweet because your setup times are super, super short. Your downtime is super short. The battery power is super awesome. And of course, all of the DOP choice modifiers, they scale to any configuration of light that you want. So you can get them from the little Lycos lights. These guys have modifiers to the 1x1s, to the 2x1s, to then when you get into some of the crazy stuff where you start doing like dual and quad arrays in your 1x1 and 2x1s, there are on-light modifiers for all of those. So the ease of use for that stuff is really, really good. Why didn't you use barn doors with your backlight fixture behind you now? Oh, like this guy here? I mean, this light isn't actually really doing anything. It's like barely on. So I just really want to use using it more as like a prop than anything. But like for this source over here, which is also one of those, I've got an octabox on that one and kind of a, I think it's like an ultra or a magic cloth over the front of that. So that's where I'm getting most of my light from there. But that's really mostly just for kind of demonstration purposes. What is giving that mustardy yellowish light on the left background? Let's go back over here real quick. This is a great question. So in this tight one here, this guy. So what I'll do is I'll back this out to this shot here. So the lights that we also didn't have control over, of course, were these lights back in here in the interiors. So what you're actually seeing in that setup right there, right there, this is that window that has that little fluorescent light right here that we didn't have control over. Fortunately, fluorescents aren't all that bright, so the fluorescent light wasn't actually casting into our scene itself. But in that tight shot there, you get a glimpse of that, as well as in a shot like this. You can see it kind of here, back here behind the door. So you're getting kind of some of that mustardy yellow color, and that's just coming off of the walls of that interior. That interior, for whatever reason, has kind of like all of the walls and ceilings are painted like smoker, like nicotine stained walls. It's fine. It was no big deal. I didn't really have a need for it again because fluorescents are not all that bright. So it wasn't messing up my scene at all here. So let's see here. Why is your backlight at that? Let's see here. So why is your backlight at an angle versus a straight vertical? So are you referring to my implied white light here? So this light here, the reason why this light is at an angle and not kind of straight up and down like this light is because I didn't need the light to be here. Where I needed that light to be was to give me some light here on this wall and then also to really illuminate the top of this. So in the opening shot of our scene here, which we can kind of go back and look at real quick here, it starts here with this puddle. I'm going to turn the audio on and off here. It starts with this puddle and we then have this kind of walking down and across, right? That shadow that's right there is the thing that I wanted. That was the piece that I was really looking to get. And that I got with this light. For continuity's sake, I needed him walking towards the phone. So we flipped that shot in post, which is why the light looks like it's coming from the other direction. But all of that light was coming off of that implied 1x1. The nice thing with modified lights or modifying lights, especially when we're talking about implied modified lights, is that we can move them and change them to get them to behave however we want, because anybody who's watching a short scene like that isn't sitting in this virtual room here isn't going to question how that lighting works. The things that audiences notice is when color temperatures aren't matched, when skin tones aren't resolved for well, or when the behavior of a light doesn't match the intended use case of the scene. They're not going to be able to identify those things, but those are the things that they're going to notice. If the lights don't match in terms of their color values, if skin tones don't register very well in camera, or if the light behavior doesn't match the scene that you're in, those are the things that get noticed. Outside of us, nobody's going to notice that implied motivated light is going to be at a slightly different direction than the practical that was on set. But that is a great question. You mean this one here? Well, again, this light actually isn't doing anything. This is just to show you guys a light panel kind of in motion. I mean, it's off now. So like it's just kind of for looks here. But it's not adding anything to that. I have two lights here, which are doing all of the illumination on me here. I've got those guys there. Okay, here. So let's hear thoughts on how to add a catch light with an LED fixture that wants to spread all over the entire face. Brian, that is a great question. So a catch light, if you guys are unfamiliar, is people look their best when their eyes look alive. And the way that their eyes look alive is when you can actually see the reflections of the world in their eyes. So having a catch light or an eye light is by having a light source that is in a way that it is actually giving you some reflection of that light in the eyeballs. If you don't have a catch light, oftentimes you'll get what are called dead eyes, and it's just where the scene can be lit really well, but the people aren't going to really look alive. So a couple of things when it comes to catch lights. One, of course, the closer a light is to your subject, the more influence that light is going to have on your scene. So you don't necessarily want to have catch lights really close to your subject. Some people will use things as simple as like a little pen light, a small little flashlight, again, dimmed down to such a degree or kind of pointed just off of the subject that it'll still kind of give a little reflection in the eye. But again, we don't necessarily want to light faces. That's not the goal. The goal is to light spaces. So we have in a series of these here, and if I come back over here, this guy, right? So in this shot here, we have a really defined catch light in that eye. See that just reflective shiny part that's kind of hitting the white of his eye there? That's just coming off of the 2x1 soft that I have that's, 20, 30 feet away from him. All of those lights that we had in those scenes were pointed fairly directionally at our subject, which means that depending on where their face was or what direction they were pointing, chances of them catching one of those fixtures in their eyes is pretty high. So generally, when I approach a lighting setup, I will light that scene in a way that will pretty much ensure that I will have a catch light no matter where I am. That said, I do have a small pen light that if we're really desperate for a catch light and the scene really calls for it, I can throw a pen light up really quick. But again, that's going to be tougher to pull off in a scene like this because, of course, we are so directional and we are lighting with the intent of it becoming dark. So you have to play with it a little bit that way. But my biggest suggestion would be to light whole spaces and to set your fixtures in a way that are going to catch your eyes. If you want to see, by the way, off topic a little bit, but if you want to see a really cool thing about catch lights and how those work, look at the behind the scenes for Knives Out. Some of the stuff that they did to make glasses reflections look like certain lighting things. It's unbelievable the amount of detail that went into the lighting, specifically catch lighting for that movie. So that's a super, super cool behind the scenes I think you can find online. Okay, so all that to say, let's look at one more here real quick here. So let's go to this guy. This is where we can get a really good example, not only of the three lights and how they're working on our subject, but also on those practicals in the background. Again, these three right here, these are those Lycos Plus lights that are set to like 2% intensity. So they are extremely bright lights. But again, nobody's going to question why the garage door has uplighting, right? But you can see just how much dimension that brings to the background of my scene. Without those, really all we're going to see is this blue reflection that's coming off of these plastic drapes that's going to draw attention to the fact that the moonlight is, of course, a source. So by having these practicals in that space to kind of add to the general aesthetic of the piece that we're filming here, does a lot both narratively but also functionally to kind of help kind of mask some of this reflection that's coming off of those drapes there. Now, on the floor here behind him on this kind of concrete wall right here, that's where you can really see what our implied motivated light is doing, our white light is doing, because all of this that's being illuminated right here is coming off of this light, which is up off camera in this direction here. And you can see that the tone of that is matched really nicely from this, which is catching some of the real light or the practical light that's coming up off of that. Now, if we zoom into the face real quick here, again, same thing here. We have the white light that's kind of hitting this side of the face here. We have the blue wash from the moonlight that's coming across the camera side of the face. And then we're getting some of this orange light from the sodium vapor, which is coming across the side of the hair there. Now, I don't know if you can see, I have to zoom in a little bit. Ooh, zoom in a little bit more here. But you can even see in the camera left eye, we're still getting a catch light on that eye from that 1x1 hard that's hanging up over in that end on this side over here. So again, no matter how you have it set up, if we light with the intention of lighting a full space, right? Where does the scene take place? Let's light that space. And then of course we can modify and adjust as we need to for some of the close-ups and tights. Eliminates downtime, but also can set you up in a way to have lighting consistency throughout your scene. One of the things I find super distracting when watching a lot of pieces is when they go through and do these little individual lighting setups throughout a whole scene because they didn't light the entire space, that lighting can become inconsistent and that lighting can then draw attention to itself. And that's the last thing we want to do, is to draw attention to ourselves, because that pulls people out of the stories that we're telling, which of course is the entire purpose of why we do any of this, is to of course tell compelling stories. Okay, so let's see here. We only have a couple of minutes left here. So if you guys have any questions, please feel free to, again, throw them in the chat or throw them in the Q&A here. Matthew says, would you use catch lights in an interview scenario, or would that just seem too sourcey? No, you absolutely need to have catch lights in an interview setup. Right? The last thing that you want is for the subject or the person who's conveying information to an audience to have dead eyes, right? That's not what we want, unless, of course, it's like Robert Durst in The Jinx or whatever, where you want them to look terrifying. Really, you want to have catch light most of the time. Whenever and wherever you can, you want people to feel and seem alive. But you don't necessarily have to have a dedicated light that is then your catch light. You can set up your lighting in a way that then the lighting itself creates catch lights in the eyes. So for instance, like me right now looking at you, if you look, there's a really big catch lights kind of on these corners of my eyes, and that's coming from this giant light source that I have here off to my right, your left. And that's creating a catch light for me. So just being intentional with where you place your lights to create catches within the eyes, that's step one. If we then need to supplement to add something to create a catch light, you can do that. You could do that with something with as simple as like a bounce card, right? So if you bounce light in, that's going to give you a nice big source without necessarily punching in a ton of light, depending on how your lighting is set up, that can then catch in the eyes. But yeah, catch lights, super, super, super important there. Light bright and gray dark, and lighting spaces, not faces, are great and easy to remember tips. Thanks. Yeah, Matthew, they're awesome. Those two things alone are going to change the way that people approach light. The last thing, of course, being understanding how light behaves. Hard light to soft light. There is a time and a place that hard light makes sense. There is a time and a place that soft light makes sense. And like in this scene here that we looked at today, you need both, right? Not all light needs to be soft. Not all light needs to be hard, but understanding how do we get hard light out of a fixture or soft light out of a fixture, and using that information to determine where and how we place those lights, and then what modifiers we use on those lights is going to make a world of difference in sculpting the stories that we're trying to light and tell. Lighting, like everything else, should be first with story in mind. How do I want my audience to feel when they watch this piece? And that should dictate everything, right? That should dictate your mood boards. That should dictate your location scouting. That should dictate your tech days, your lighting days, your camera days. All of that stuff should be dictated by how you want your audience to feel about the thing that they're watching. And that is what makes these fixtures so much fun to play with, because they are so versatile that I can use these fixtures in a whole host of ways to get a ton of different looks to then tell the stories that I want to tell. Are there any other questions, comments, or concerns that you have for me while I am here? If not, again, you can reach me on Instagram. You can reach out to the Light Panels team. If you found this helpful, which I hope you did, please do make sure that you register for the next one. You can find that on the landing page here that they put in the link. You can also watch this video starting, I believe it is tomorrow, online. So if you wanted to recap any of the stuff that we talked about, you can find that on their YouTube channel there as well. Last question here I've got from Roberto. He says, in what scenario do you use a Fresnel to hair light or backlight? Fresnel lights are awesome, right? Fresnel lights are super, super cool lights. But again, it depends on how you want it to behave. Fresnel lights are really sweet. But depending on how you want to modify and how you want it to work, generally hair lights or backlights should only be illuminated enough to separate your foreground from your background. They shouldn't be so bright that they draw attention to themselves, right? Unless there's like a meaningful purpose of why you should have that much. But really, when I set up a hair light or a backlight, I crank it up and then I pull it back and I keep pulling it back until it becomes just unnoticeable. Because really, it's just a functional light primarily. So when you would use one type of fixture versus another depends entirely on how you want your light to behave. But hair lights and backlights generally should be your most dim, unless you're doing like a reverse key lighting setup here. Whitney asks about NAB. That is a great question for the light panels team. I am not entirely sure how all of that stuff works. Just yes. Oh, perfect. Simon says yes. There, we will be there. So good. But again, if you have any comments or questions, reach out to me, reach out to Light Panels. This series is going to keep going, and with every one of these, we're going to get a little bit crazier. So stick around for that. I have had a ball with this. We're going to continue this all year. So thanks again to Light Panels for hosting such a thing. And I'm looking forward to seeing you guys all at the next one. Thanks.